Alright, I'm going to start back up. Just a couple things as we get started. First, you can see this up there. You may want to, if you get a chance, go out to the URL that's listed right there. That's from the Mozilla website. I'll leave it up there for a minute. It's the Mozilla Developer Network, and it's their CSS reference. It's very complete. It's got virtually anything you can do with CSS. It's all hyperlinked, and then they go to another page that's specific for that material. This is where I got a lot of the information from that I use when creating this. So again, it's https:// in fact, I'll take this and I'll save it back out to the P drive. But again, it's https://developer.mozilla.org/en-us/docs/web/css/reference. Now I'm going to take it off in just a second, but if you didn't have time to type it all in, just when you go into Google, just type in Mozilla CSS reference and it'll be the first one that comes up. Okay? And again, when you look on here, notice they have the CSS and it says an exhaustive reference. So here's where they list basically everything that you can do in CSS. And see how long it is. Alright, I went up one more because there's also a tutorial, as it says, which provides a step-by-step introduction and a bunch of demos. Alright, so hopefully that, if that's something you're interested in, you'll have a chance to go and take a look at it. The other thing, just so you know, if you were in the class this morning, both the lectures from this morning's class are now they've now been uploaded to YouTube. As soon as this class is done, I'm going to produce the ones that I'm doing now, and those will be out there by no later than, I don't know, 3:30 to 4 o'clock this afternoon. All right. So, what I want you to do then, if you would, we're done for now. I did pretty this up just so you see it. I got to make it small because it's otherwise it doesn't show. But you can see I did pretty everything up. All right. So it all lines up nice and nifty like. But what I want you to do is to open up the main.css file, if you would, please. This is where we're going to put the CSS that's going to affect the sheet that or the home page that we just created. Once you find that, the main.css file, I want you to scroll down to about line 63. Where it says author's custom styles, because that's where we're going to put our stuff into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some stuff in here, and then I'm going to run it to show you what happened. Then I'll put some more stuff in there and then run it. And that's what we're going to do. All right, there's not a boatload of stuff. We may get it done in the class period today. We may not. I'm not worried about it one way or the other. All right, if we do get it done and there's 5 or 10 minutes left, I'm just done. It doesn't make any sense to go on and go any further today. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some stuff that's going to affect the body. I want to set the font family, first of all. When I do this stuff, I like to use Arial, an Arial font. You may or may not agree with that. Now, just so you know, I want you to see up here. I'm going to type in a few things, and I'm going to come back and talk about them, okay? But I'm going to put in here just some other fonts that I know of. Helvetica, I think that's spelled right now. Times New Roman, and I'll put in a serif also, and I'll leave it at that. All right, so I'll let you put that in, and I'll go back and talk about what it means. I'm going to put in 2 more lines here. I'm going to put in font size. I'll make it a little bit bigger even than I had it, so I'm going to make it 13 pixels, and we're going to set up a background color. So I'll let you put those in. I'll give you a minute or two to put that in, and we'll come back and talk about what all of it means. Okay? So if I save this, go back and run it again, not that file. Okay, all I did right now for now was just change the background color, and the font size has been changed. Okay, that's about it. So you can start seeing some of the changes, but let's talk about what each one of these things means. All right, font family means just that. Now, if I had just done this, so for just a second, I'm going to bring it back, but for just a second, I'm going to remove this. If I had just done that, that would say use Arial font. All right, but what if the user doesn't have an Arial font? Then usually it would use whatever the default font would be for that browser. All right, but by putting in something like this, what I'm saying is attempt first to use an Arial font. If you can't find Arial, attempt to find Helvetica. If you can't find Helvetica, find a Times. If you can't find Times, use a Times New Roman. Notice how that's in double quotes because it's more than one word. All right, and if you can't find that, use serif. There's some really good URLs out there. Unfortunately, I left my stuff upstairs where I had all my notes on, so I'm just doing this by hand. But what I'll do is with this stuff that we're working on right now, at least the CSS page, I'll make sure that I put down all the sites that I used when I was filling this stuff out. So if you want to look at that, you'll be able to. All right, the font size, again, 13 pixels. You'll notice because if I change it, for example, from 13, I don't want you to do this, but I'm changing it from 13 to 23. All right, and you saw what it looked like. Notice if I refresh, well, it changes very dramatically, very quickly. All right, now that's not going to make a lot of sense. And imagine trying to play with something like that and having it be set up for mobile devices, but 13's not bad. The CCC stuff that's in here, we talked about this the other day. Remember, that's a triplet. That's the same thing as saying CC, CC, CC. But since they're repeating, we only need to use 3 of them. All right? And you'll notice if I change it, for example, from CC, CC to like C2, C2, C2 as an example. All right, so I'm going to save that, go back in, and refresh the browser, and you immediately start seeing a change. Not a lot, because that's still pretty close to the color that we had, but I changed the font size also. But this is what I've used. Again, is it the great coloring? It works. All right. Anything that's in there in these 3 tags, so by default, unless we tell it otherwise, everything that's in our body is going to be Arial font, 13 pixels with that background color. Does all that make sense? That's what we've told it so far. We're going to do some overriding on some other stuff as we get going. All right? Now, you may or may not remember, but one of the first things that we saw, when we looked in here, when we looked at the index file, that was our body. So that's the beginning of our body. That's the end of our body at the very bottom. All right? But we also have inside of here, we also have a div that we gave an ID of container to. Okay? And that started there, and it ends all the way down here. So the stuff I'm doing now, it's as though I put it in the body tag, but I'm putting it for the div tag. All right? And you might say, well, then why did you do that? I didn't have to. But I wanted to come in here and at least show you some stuff where we were doing some work with, in our CSS, in our CSS that we were doing some work with IDs. All right? So I'm going to come in here and say ID, which is the #, container. All right? We're going to put a few things in here. All right? The first thing I want to show you very quickly, I'm going to put something in. Don't worry about typing it in right now. Okay? I want to show you something because I'm immediately going to change it. All right? So I'm going to put something in. I'm going to run it and show it to you. Then I'm going to immediately change it. When I say now, then type it in. All right? So for right now, I'm going to put in a fixed width. And I'm going to say 960 pixels, which is kind of a standard desktop type of size. So when I put that in, you may or may not notice a lot of difference on here. But when I refresh, okay, now it's saying 960 pixels. That's the width it's supposed to have. But the point is, when I go in and try to make this narrower, you see how this doesn't change? It's set up to a fixed width of 960 pixels. So it's right now, it's not at all responsive. All right, so we're going to at least start to make it responsive. So instead of putting in 960 pixels, I'm going to use a percentage, which is what you typically use with this. So I'm going to put in, I want you to put that in, please, a width of 85 pixels. And it's not perfect. There's still a lot more we can do to it. But notice just by making that one change, when I go in and run it now, I'll remember eventually to run the right one. But by going in and running it now when I go in here and I change it, you see how it's changing accordingly? All right? It's starting to become responsive. It's not perfect by any means, but it's got some responsiveness built into it. That's what I want you to start understanding. Go ahead. It can matter a lot where you put them. Yes, and not only that, we're still going to do some stuff by putting that in there with a container. All right, what that's going to do is you still can sit there, and you'll see this as we go through and start putting more stuff in. Sometimes the stuff we put in is not going to equal 100%. All right, it's going to equal maybe 90%. And the reason for that is because we've got this width set to 85. If you try to make things too big, it'll cover everything. And then what will happen is you start moving it around and trying to work with responsiveness, it'll actually overflow, which will look really ugly. All right, so yeah, typically a lot of times if it's a container like this, a container div, yes, that's what you'll do, and that's where you'll at least start your responsiveness. All right, so a couple more things we're going to put in here. All right, I'm going to change the background. You might say why. You'll see it in just a minute. So I'm going to say background pound FFF. Again, I'm using one of these triplets. I'm going to put a couple more things in. Yeah, in fact, we'll just leave it at that. So I'm going to save that and run it again. We'll come right back to it. We'll come right back to it in just a second. All right, but now what have we done? I've taken the area that's in here that's going to be my part of my page that I care about, and I've made it white. All right, so I've made the background color, but that's the div. Notice the stuff in here that's still gray? That's part of the body, but it's not part of the div. All right? So we've got that done. Just a couple more things I want to add here. All right, one of the first things that I want to add is if you take a quick look, and I'll come right back to it, but if you take a quick look at this right now, not centered very well on the page. Looks kind of ugly, in fact. So there's a little hack that you can use, and typically when people put a div at the top with container, this is the hack that they use. All right. Sometimes it's called a hack, sometimes it's a kludge. And when you hear that, most people have a bad connotation with hack or kludge. It's just, it's a fix that somebody put in. It's a down and dirty type of thing. We've all done this where there's something that you're very good at, and you know it's almost like the old joke about, well, there's a hole in here, and you go and you fix it by putting a piece of bubble gum in it, type of thing, and you go back and fix it later, and maybe you won't. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say margin 10 px auto. All right, so margin 10 px auto. And after I put that in, again, I'll come right back to it, but please look up here. Watch the change. All right, see what happened with just that one change? All right, and I want you to understand something as we start to go through this. All right, this says right here, when you put in margins, when you put in a lot of this stuff that can affect the top, the right-hand side, the bottom, and the left-hand side, you put it in that order. So it's top, followed by the right-hand side, followed by the bottom, followed by the left-hand side. What this is saying, this is a shortcut. This says I want 10 pixels of space or margin at the top and the bottom, and I want the sides to be able to auto-correct themselves. That's why what you saw in here originally with this was the right was pushed way the heck over, because that's how it was set up by default. And that may have looked different. I didn't try it in Firefox. It may have looked different in there, and it may have looked different yet still in IE. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring some stuff to it where it hopefully at least makes a little bit of sense. All right. The next thing I want us to put it in here, but we're not going to talk about it for right now, because otherwise I'll get off on too big a tangent. We're telling it here if we have an overflow. So if in other words, if the area is too big, we want you to automatically handle it. What that means is it's the old proverbial, if you try shoving 10 pounds worth in a 5-pound bag. So if I've got an area that's this big and I try to put that much information into it, it'll automatically put scroll bars in for me. All right? And that's all that means. And the last thing I'm going to put in here is I'm going to type in another thing this is specific. This is the first one that we're putting in that's specific to CSS3. Border radius, and we're going to say 10 pixels. Okay? Which means give me 10 pixels all the way around. All right? Now, again, I'll come right back to it, but please look up on the screen here. Everybody see the squared off edges right there? See that? Now notice what happens. See how they're rounded? That was the 10 pixels. All right? Again, if you try doing that in a browser that doesn't support CSS3, it doesn't give you an error, but it just won't round them. So this is just something that's going to work on the newer browsers. I figured that'd be something simple to show you, fairly dramatic in its effect, and you can see it right away, and it's CSS3 specific. All right? Okay, then let's just move on. Any questions? No one had any questions on the body? I'm going over this fairly quickly, but does the container, does the stuff that's in there at least make some sense? The best way to learn this, just so you know, all right? So let's say that Caleb has a problem with this. You know, he just fell a little bit behind or whatever. The best thing to do is kind of what I've been trying to show you. Since you've got it in there, you can do it one of two ways. Put it in there a line at a time, or once it's all in there, take it out a line at a time. Just comment it out. Remember to put comments in here. It's a /* and it ends with a */. So if I comment that out, I come back here and I refresh, you notice that they're squared again. So if you want to see what something's doing, if you think, well, he kind of went over that fast and he talks way too fast anyway, then you do it on your own time at your own pace. All right? So we've got those two things in there. All right, the next thing that we want to do is we want to go in and work on this header that's here, because let's face it, really, right now, you know, I put the border back, or I thought I did, so maybe I didn't save. I didn't. So I want to put the border back, but right now this heading isn't doing, I don't know about you, it's not doing too much for me. It's just now it's some black text on a white background. So we're going to change that up a little bit too. All right. Now our author, what the author mentioned is that when you do stuff like this, all right, basically what he had you do was just put in font weight bold. But I said they're already bolded, so it didn't show you an effect. So I tried to come up with some stuff that I thought would show you an effect. So this is our header, all right, but this would do it for all headers. We wanted to only do it with headers that have an ID of main. So we may end up putting other headers in later, but we only want to affect that one. And I'm going to put in some padding. All right, and I'm going to put in padding of 10 pixels, and I'm going to put in a different background color. All right, I'm going to just put those, I've got those two in there. I'll just stop. I'm not going to even run it yet. I'll give you a chance to type all that in. Again, I realize we all type at different speeds. And I may or may not have told you this story, but I will tell it very quickly. Years ago, I taught a keyboarding class, and one of the guys in the class, literally 2 days before the class, broke his right arm. He's right-handed. He got up to 43 words a minute by typing with just his left hand, and he's right-handed. So anybody who tells me they can't learn to type, I think that's BS. I'm semi-arthritic in both my hands, and I can type fast. And if errors don't matter, I can type unbelievably fast. All right. So we've got that in there again. Let's look at what we just did. All right. So that's what it looks like now. I refresh. We put like a little light color for our main heading up here, a little lighter gray than what was shown, and we put some padding around it, so it's not pushed up against the side anymore. Again, if you don't understand that, the best thing to do is to take these two lines, comment them both out, save, go back to the browser, and refresh. And you can see it's all pushed against here. And then come back in again and uncomment them out. Again, save, and go back in, and now look at it, and now refreshed. Boom. All right. We're going to want to push all this stuff over all of it eventually. But we're just doing it a bit at a time here. Okay? So, the next thing that I want to do is I want to start working on the navigation section. Okay? And again, I'm just going to keep going unless you stop me. Now, the navigation section is an unordered list, so I'm going to start with an unordered list here. And the way that this is set up now, this is going to work on every unordered list. And I'm going to tell it I don't want any padding, 0, and I don't want any margin. Do you notice what's missing from this? We didn't put PX, because if you're setting it to 0, it doesn't matter 0 what. All right, so for my unordered lists, I'm telling it that I want it to have no padding and no border. All right, what does that mean? Again, it's easiest to show you. Please look up on the screen. Look, there's my unordered list. I'm refreshing. All right, I just pushed it over. We're going to end up moving it in just a second. All right, but now all unordered lists have no padding and no margin in them. All right. So we've got that done. Again, I think that with a lot of this, if you just see it, boom, it's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense then. Yeah, I see you type it in, but when I see you actually run it on the page, it makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to do a bunch of stuff with my nav bar. I'm going to start with just the actual nav, or the nav section itself. And again, I'm going to set the height. Here I will set it. I don't want it to be 0, so I'm going to set it to 40 pixels. I'm going to set the background color to pound. I'll use another triplet, AAA. And any overflow, now instead of having it show me scroll bars, I want any overflow there might happen to be hidden. So please put in those 3 lines. And in case you are a fast typist, the next one has just got a couple lines, so I'm going to add those 2. All right, I'll give you a second just to get all that stuff keyed in. Again, it's just about 2:30. Whatever we don't finish, we're finishing next time. Then we're going to add another page, and the next page that we add, we're going to use some interactive JavaScript so you can start seeing some of the stuff that you're able to do with this. All right? All right, I don't hear much typing. What I'm going to do, because I want to show you what's going on here, is this one, the second one I put in, I'm going to comment it out for just a second. All right? Hopefully this makes sense. That I want my navigation area, I want the height to be higher, 40 pixels. I want it to be bigger. All right? My background area, the color will be different. This, when you say background, you've got your choice. You can say background or you can say background color. Either one works. All right? Background is just a shortcut for background color. Okay? And the overflow, if there is any, we want it to be hidden. We don't want it to show. All right? So again, I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back here. And please look at this section because it's going to start changing now. All right. You see the color changed. And right now, the reason it's not showing, the reason that I commented it out is we said hidden. All right, because we're going to change the orientation from vertical, which it is right now. In just a second, we're going to change it to horizontal. All right. As we get moving on and on in here. So it might, as we put this stuff in, again, as I keep saying, comment stuff in, comment it out, or do it a little bit at a time. Whatever is the easiest for you. All right, so now I uncommented that one, and I'm going to come back, and again, I'm going to refresh. So see what has happened? It's looking a little bit better. Now, this doesn't look great. All right, I'm not going to go out and try to sell this thing to anybody, but we're making a site for a first site that's not bad. It's going to be responsive. It'll have HTML5 in it. It'll have CSS3 in it, in addition to regular HTML and to regular CSS. So the next thing that's in here that I want to change is I don't like these anchors. I don't like the way that blue looks on that background, and I don't like the underlines. So I'm going to get rid of both of those. All right. You remember this from, this is something we actually did go over in the book. This says for my navigation area. This says for any LI elements that are inside of a navigation area. And this says for any anchor tags that are inside of a navigation area. Does that make sense? We talked about those combinators. All right. So these are the descendant combinators that we're using right now. We're just keeping it real simple. All right. I'm hoping everybody has the nav stuff here and the nav LI so I can just move this up. Okay. So what are we going to put in here? Well, the color. Anybody remember what color this is? Okay. We'll see in just a minute. Sounds like a good guess to me. All right. Now we're going to say text decoration none. That means turn off the underline. And then we're going to say font weight bold. Now it'll make sense to bold these. So we want our hyperlinks now to be white. We don't want them to be underlined, and we want them to be bolded. If I put in everything correctly, now when I go back to this, see what they look like now, and then when I refresh, there we go. Now, again, you might find that that's really ugly, then go change it to whatever color you want. That's why I'm going to let you do your own assignment. I want you to go nuts with your own colors. You know, if we had a student who took a class like this a couple years ago, she just loved purple. Everything she did was in purple. And she did some bizarre stuff, but it looked really kind of neat. I don't know. Caleb's question was her favorite movie The Color Purple? I never asked her. All right, good. All right. Now what we want to do is when we're hovering, when we're going to actually hover over one of those links, now instead of having it be white like you saw, we'll change the color completely. We'll have it be black. And again, we're just doing that for effect. All right. This is one of those pseudo classes that we talked about the other day. All right. So again, I'll give you a second. Just put it in, but take a look now when I refresh. Notice now I haven't refreshed yet. See that? Now notice when I refresh, all right, it's real easy to fake this thing out, and sometimes it takes a while to catch back up. All right, there's like a little flicker type of thing. How do you fix that? You fix that with jQuery. But we're not talking about that this semester. All right. So we've got the nav hover. All right. Then the next thing that I want to do is this area that's right here. That's our main area. Our main area is everything that's between here, right there, that's in there, in between there and the footer. That's our main area. That's what we defined. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to come into that main area and I want to put some padding on all of it. All right? And that was what I used that tag for, that main tag. And padding, I'll put about 20 pixels. All right, I'll give you a second to put that in. All right, I've saved it. Now please take a look up on the screen because that's the best way to tell. Look at this section right here. That's before 20 pixels of padding. That's after 20 pixels of padding. Does that make sense? Now you can see it still doesn't look that good. These should be pushed over, etc. That's all stuff that we'll get to. Don't worry about it. But it's looking, I think, at least better, a little bit more professional with just about everything that we're adding. All right? So the next thing we want to do is our main section. You may or may not remember this, but from the way this looked, our main section is everything basically up till here. All that blue stuff. That thing down at the bottom that says 5 things you should know, that's the aside. So right now, by default, when you work on these sections, they're greedy. They take up as much room as you'll give them. So they're taking up the 100% minus the 20 pixels that we put in there. So they're taking up as much as they can. Well, I don't want that because I want this thing that's right here, I want that to move over here. That's what an aside is. It's typically on the side. Or as Caleb would say, it's on the aside. All right? But that's what we want to do. And in order to do that, there's a couple things that we're going to have to do. So we're going to go to our section. And in that section, we put an ID in of main. And we want to come in there, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width, and I'm going to set it to 70%. I'm using a relative term there, width 70%. I'm going to put another line in, but before I do, I want to go back and run this. All right? So I'm going to put in another line in just a second, but I want to show you the dramatic effect this is going to have. All right? So by putting that there, doesn't look like anything because I have not refreshed, but when I refresh, it doesn't look any different. Because we have to tell it that basically to just float and use that 70%. So we have to do what's called a CSS float. All right? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say float left. All right? That one line, please take a look up on the screen here and now notice how it's changed. Why isn't it taking my changes? Not sure. Well, I'm just going to keep going on, but you will see, you'll have to take my word for it. We're going to see the changes. All right? All right, so now I want to put in the aside tag. And I want that to have a width of 20%. And this is where I mentioned this to you before. 70 plus 20 does not equal 100. It equals 90. I'm allowing some space in there for a little bit of margin type of area. All right, so the stuff doesn't look squished. And I'm going to tell this to float, and I want it to float to the right. Now let's see once I put that in, if I refresh, if that looks any better. All right, well, it's getting there. See that? It's moved it to the right, so it's still not perfect. We're still going to have to do a little bit of work on it. Okay? But it's a start. Okay? So what I just did was the stuff here. I made the width of the main section 70%, the width of the aside section, all right, I made that 20%, and I floated the main section to the left and the other one to the right, because by default, when it does these things, they work like they're blocks. There's like a blank line. There's blank lines between them. All right, it doesn't know to put these two things together. By using floats, we're able to put the stuff together. All right, now, was that a good explanation? Let's put it this way. That was an explanation. All right, so if I come back out to that site I told you about before, and I go over to this, that same site that I just mentioned to you, and in there I find the CSS reference, which is in there someplace. All right, but I want to, instead of font family, I want to type in float. I just as soon have you read this from somebody who knows a hell of a lot more about it than I do. Not only that, when they show you this, they're going to show you examples in this stuff. So they tell you how you can float, what you can float, etc. There's the syntax, all right, and there's examples. And they show you once you do this. They talk about positioning, etc. I think this will help. And if you say, I don't have time to do it, that's an individual decision you're making. All right? All right, so we've got the aside done. As we keep going here, now I want to do some work on my labels. And I'm going to tell them I want them to display in a block format. Remember when we did the display block? All right, when we did that CSS validation where we had, so you had the label on a line by itself, and then right underneath it you had the text box. All right, and you may or may not be surprised, but when we do this, and I go and I refresh, doesn't really look very different. Well, first of all, we don't really have many labels in here. Second of all, we're doing other CSS that's doing some overrides on that. We're going to use that stuff later. All right? All right. Up here, previously I did a little bit of work on the unordered list. I believe we did at least, where we set the padding to 0 and the margin to 0. Well, the problem with that is, as you can see, is with this unordered list, see that? It's all the way pushed over because we set the padding to 0. And even though we went and we told everything to move over, that still didn't. All right, so let's move that over right now. And there's different ways I can do that. One way is I can go back up to the unordered list that I had up above and just change it. But I'm just going to add another UL tag down here for now. And I'm going to say UL padding left, and I'm going to set that to 10 pixels. And just to be sure it looks decent, I'm also going to tell it for my ULs, I want the LI, and I'll put some padding in there also. So I'll do some left padding, and I'll make that only 5 pixels. All right, so I've got those two things that I've just put in. And again, as always, the proof is in the seeing. Take a look at it. This is before the padding. There it is after the padding. Now, I should have probably put in more. It still could be moved over more. I don't really care. If that bugs you, then instead of making it 5 pixels down there, make it 10 pixels. But after a while, what you'll notice is you start getting real paranoid about this stuff. All right, and that's what's moving over, is this. So don't worry about it. We'll make it look better when we get all done. It'll look about as good as we'll need to have it look. Let's put it that way. All right? All right, just a couple more things. Believe it or not, we're just about done, and that's good. So my ordered lists, and where's the ordered list? That's the one down here. We haven't told it that it's supposed to be done any special way yet, but we're going to do that now. Okay? All right. So what are we going to do? Well, for our ordered list, we're going to come down here and we're going to say, well, let's see. We want a bottom margin on it. So that's margin bottom. All right. So if I say margin bottom and I put here 5 pixels, all right, I'm done, but I want to show you something. Okay? If you decide you want to do it like this, saying this, I'm going to put a comment here. This is the same thing as saying margin, space, 0, because that's the top, 0 because that's the right, 5 pixels because that's the bottom, and 0 because that's the left. Do you understand how that means the same thing? To me, it's much more descriptive if you're only doing one kind of CSS, one kind of padding to put that in there. If you don't agree, there's nothing wrong with doing it the other way. Some people will do it the other way, saying that maybe later I'm going to want to put some margin in. Now I don't have to add anything. All right? Again, it's a matter of personal preference. So I put a little 5-pixel margin at the bottom. I'm going to save. I'm going to come back out here. There it is, and I'm going to refresh. And you didn't see it because right now I just put a little more padding down here. So what did you do that for? Well, that's the other one that we're going to put in. This is actually the last CSS for now that we're going to put in here. And we're going to say, and I know I'm missing something. I can already tell. So we haven't fixed the, this is going to fix the footer, but it's not going to fix, I'm missing something, and I don't know what I'm missing. That's why I said when I try to do this off the top of my head, stupid me. But we're going to do the footer last. Okay? It'll work? Okay. Everybody hear that? Take this off of, on line 121 on mine, take that off where it says section main. Just make it section, and let's see if that pushes it up the way we want it pushed up. All right, see where it is? That's what we wanted. And it also moved the footer. We'll get that in just a second. That's what I wanted, was this thing to move up here. Thank you very much. I'm never too proud to ask for help. All right, so this originally said on line 121, section ID of main, but we wanted the entire section. We wanted the whole thing done. So that fixed it. Thank you. All right, so the last thing that we have to do in here is the footer. And there are 2 lines. We'll put in some padding. So padding 10 pixels. You already know what kind of padding that is now. We've talked about it. All right. And text align center. All right. Okay. I'm going to save. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to redo this. And there it is on the bottom, and it's centered. All right. Hopefully yours looks like mine. This is not a pretty site. I just meant it to be functional. The other reason that I did this is, if you've noticed, this is all stuff about HTML5. So maybe there's a slight chance you'll read some of it. And when I say that, I'm not trying to sound like a smart aleck, or a smart ass, as I was going to say, but it's just that there's stuff in here if you do want to glean something from it. All right? So that's everything. So what we've been able to accomplish in the class so far is we've gone into HTML5 boilerplate. From there, we stripped it down And we just accepted the modernizer and the jQuery, which we'll use in later classes, just so you saw that they were in there. All right. Then we went in and we added, and we created a very, very generic, very vanilla-looking page with absolutely no CSS in it. All right. And in there we had a section which had an article. We also had an aside tag. Then we went in and using about, because we started here on line 63, so using about 90 lines approximately, 90 or 95 lines of CSS, all right, we formatted it. So again, ideally when you're all done, yours now looks like that, all right, which isn't bad. It doesn't look terrible. And again, you can already see this kind of stuff, that if you go into any place on here where you've set colors, which again would be the white background here, would be the gray background here, would be the lighter gray background here, would be the gray bar that we have here, and the white and the black we have here. If you go back to any of those and you start changing them into some of the colors that we talked about, or you go and you look up, there was a hyperlink in our book about the 146 web-safe CSS3 colors. You can make this thing look remarkably different by just changing those colors. And if you say, well, yeah, I did that, what else can I do? You can change font types, you can change font styles, you can change font size, you can do all sorts of different stuff. But the idea today, and I'm very proud of all of you, and I'm being serious, is we got all this done today. All right? So it is 2:46. I'm finished. Any last questions? Next time, then, we are going to build this about page. And we're going to put some interactive JavaScript in there so you can see what it does. Yes, sir. No, it doesn't work like that, because text-align center is designed to work with paragraph text. All right, you can center these. I believe we have to float them, or we probably would float them right. You don't typically see them centered. Quite often you see them on the right side. All right, but I just left them here so we wouldn't have one less thing we'd have to talk about. All right. Okay. Did you listen to it?